Right. We are just missing Mr. Winston. I'm texting to see where he is, unless you've talked to him.
I'll text him.
Okay.
I did talk to him over past couple of days, but I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is our first committee meeting for environment, equity, and engagement. And I have had an honor to work with many of you in the past, and I certainly appreciate that we have staff that will be working with us and from all across departments. We have Frederico Rios, Sarah Hazel, Terry Bradley, and other staff members that will be working with our committee, because equity and engagement will be that covers pretty much all departments, everything that we do. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our committee members. I'm Dimple Ajmera, committee chair.
Good morning, I'm Renee Johnson, District 4 representative and committee member.
Good morning, Braxton Winston, at-large member and committee member.
Staff, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and the department that you work with?
Federico Rios, Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration with Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Terry Bradley with Community Relations.
Good morning, Tracy Etheridge with Community Relations.
And hi, I'm not sure if Deb and I were talking at the same time, but Sarah Hazel, Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer.
Do we have anyone else who will be supporting our committee? I see Victoria Johnson is on this
Yes, I did introduce myself. Victoria Johnson, City Manager's Office.
Okay, well, that's great. Did I miss anyone?
Councilmember Ajmira, we have Rebecca Hefner on the line, but she can't unmute, so she's listening in right now, but she'll be supporting this team as well. And then Willie Ratchford couldn't make it today, but he will be on the enhanced support team.
Okay, great. So our committee has a lot of support, which is great. I know over the past couple of days, I had an opportunity to talk to committee members, and I listened to their ideas, and I have shared those with our with Sarah Hazel. So Sarah, do you want to take it away?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Tom, if you can pull up the PowerPoint. So let me just first just say that my goal today and the goal of the team here is to help support your discussion around key policy questions that you want to tackle this year. We'll be taking notes, and you can go to a couple slides forward, Tom. Yep. We'll be taking one more. Great, we'll stop there. We'll be taking notes throughout the conversation to make sure that we can capture your interest around different policy topics. What I've done is put together a template, and the template has some key plans, some key policies and topics that we think might be beneficial for the committee to address throughout the course of this year. But really, this is about listening to you all and making sure that we capture your interests and can help support developing a work plan around what those things are. So to that end, what I would love to do is I'll hand it over to Federico Rios, who's the Assistant Director of the Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration. And so we're going to touch on a couple of the topics that are in this template that you'll see when we get through a couple staff presentations to help frame what might be some of your interests and goals to work through this year. So we'll start with Federico, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Strategic Energy Action Plan. We'll touch on engagement, and we'll touch on ADA as some topics that may be right for your engagement. And then I'll hand it back to you, Chairwoman Ajmira, to lead the discussion around what some of the policy questions might be for this year, so we can start to take notes and formulate a work plan on your behalf. So I'll hand it over to Federico Rios.
Good morning again, Chairwoman and committee members. Just this slide really just depicts the definitions that were laid out in the 2018 DE&I assessment that was conducted by the city. I think it's important to start any work regarding diversity, equity, inclusion with some firm definitions, recognizing that different people in the community define these things in very different ways. And so as you move forward in this work, I think it's vitally important to anchor ourselves in these definitions as have already been accepted by the city, again, through that 2018 assessment. We can move one slide forward. In regards to what work has already occurred, I thought it was important to share out different aspects of the work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically in these catchment areas. The 2018 DE&I assessment is integral, and for that reason, it is in that center portion of this slide. That really has defined the work since that period, but there is work that precedes that period of time. So you'll see that in the dates that are reflected on this slide. Each one of these efforts has been tied back to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it is important to recognize that they have occurred oftentimes piecemeal and not jointly in one concentrated way. And so the formation of our office, of the Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration, was an effort to bring all of these things under one umbrella and push the items forward in a really comprehensive way. Moving on to the next slide. One of the efforts that isn't captured on that slide but was paramount in this work was the work of my office along with our strategy and budget department to create an equity focus in the budgeting process last fiscal year. And so each department was tasked with reviewing their goals and checking through how equity shows up in their work. So we are very much cognizant that equity can look very different depending on the department. What the equity work of a department like CATS versus the equity work related to a department like internal audit would do is vastly different. And so we worked with individual departments to ascertain where they were related to their goals, resetting goals, changing goals, adopting goals that they did not have in the past, in an effort to ensure that their budget requests tied back to the needs of our community, especially around disproportionately affected subgroups. So our equity focus in the fiscal year was vitally important and helped us to craft a budget that was much more in line with the disparities that we saw in our community. With that, I'll shift it over to Sarah Hazel.
Great. Thank you, Federico. So we will talk a little bit at the end of a couple more slides about some of your interests in this area, but let's move on to the next slide, Tom. So starting with the environment, and I'm not going to try to walk you through the goals of the Strategic Energy Action Plan because I know how familiar you are with your strategy. But the CEAP truly is our main focus when it comes to climate action in the city. And so since it was adopted in 2018, we've worked in the 4 focus areas outlined in the plan around buildings, transportation, energy generation, and workforce development. And I will say, based on our most recent greenhouse gas inventory that we shared with you several months ago, we are focusing on the right areas. Buildings and transportation still are the areas where we are emitting the largest amount of greenhouse gases in our community. And so as a city, we've been really focusing on how we become zero carbon in our fleet and buildings by 2030, that near-term goal, and also looking towards what are the different levers and initiatives that we can start to put in place so that we can reduce our carbon footprint as a community down to 2 tons of carbon dioxide per person and strive towards that 2050 goal, especially in light of the recent science that has come out around climate change and understanding how even more critically important this really forward-thinking plan and forward-thinking goals that City Council had several years ago is to where we are right now. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to highlight a few items, and some of which I think could be very, very worthwhile to focus on as a committee. But I will say that, City Council really did have an unprecedented level of investment in our Strategic Energy Action Plan over the past several years, and in particular last year. And how that has resulted in action, we now have on-site solar in 20 locations once we complete the construction that is ongoing right now that you all approved earlier this year. And then last year with your investment that will add more solar to rooftops, including above your council chamber here in the city of Charlotte. The big piece that I think was critical this year was the Sustainable Facilities Policy. So in January, you may recall that you all adopted a new Sustainable Facilities Policy that brought that policy in alignment with these goals. And so that will include, as new buildings are being built, we are ensuring that they're built to a high standard of energy efficiency, that they're supporting our fleet electrification with electric vehicle charging, infrastructure. And then the one thing that I'll stop here and focus on for a minute is public energy benchmarking. So in that policy put forth, we committed then as a city to publicly disclose our energy usage in our buildings and to start that process for the first time. We've been managing energy as a city, for years, but using an EPA tool, putting our data into that tool so that we can look at how it compares to other cities, other buildings, and then we can use it year over year to identify where we can make the most strategic investments when City Council puts forward investments like you have over the past couple of years. The reason why I will highlight this policy is because it is a very good practice of cities, especially across some of our peer climate challenge cities who are really working to address climate goals in a very ambitious way, is not just doing that as a city, but looking towards how we can do that as a community through either a voluntary program where we're inviting and encouraging other building owners across the entire community to do the same in an effort to really identify how we can lead the way and reduce energy usage overall and really strive towards those 2050 goals. I'll go to the next slide. So a couple other items to highlight: electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging is a critical component of that 2030 goal. And right now, we are building out that network of EV charging. We have over 104 chargers. More than half of them are available to the public so that the public can charge fare-free at this time. And if they are able to purchase an electric vehicle, and they can find a place to charge through the network. Our primary goal is to charge our fleet, but when we have the capacity, we're opening this up to the public. That is all guided by our sustainable and resilient fleet policy, which enables us to always replace our vehicles with the lowest emitting vehicle available in the market, and that meets our business needs. So with this year's investment, with the CATS e-bus pilot with 18 buses, with our airport transitioning to electric buses, we will have 88 vehicles once all of those replacements have come through in the process. So the final thing that I will just highlight is that this year was the first time city staff on the city's behalf participated in proceedings through the North Carolina Utilities Commission. As you know, the Utilities Commission is a regulatory body. They have influence and work with Duke Energy when it comes to planning out how energy is generated for years to come. That has a huge impact on our goal, the mix of the grid, and how HB 951, which was an energy bill that recently passed, that helped to crystallize and put in motion some of Governor Cooper's clean energy goals. The Utilities Commission then has the purview to figure out how exactly some of that works. We, as city staff, put forward and reinforced our carbon reduction goals, your equity goals, as outlined in the CF. There is an opportunity to continue to do that, and with council's guidance, we could potentially have a robust framework around how we can work with Utilities Commission to really support not only the work that we're doing with Duke Energy in partnership, but also working with the state at that level. So just a couple projects I'll highlight, and I think that these can be more for updates in the future. We are partnering with a nonprofit on a project that will put low-cost car-sharing vehicles, so electric vehicles, in a car share program at affordable housing. We're really looking forward to sharing more about that. That project just kicked off because the grant was just received. And this is a way that we are focusing on equity. And then one other, I think, exciting project, I think many people are familiar with Ritz Park. It's one of the new parks on the west side and one of our corridors of opportunity. We are partnering with Duke Energy, Centralina, as well as UNC Charlotte to put electric vehicle charging through an innovative light pole charging structure that allows for charging for folks who may not have access to charging at home. And so I guess I'll move to the next two slides, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of some of the work we're doing on that end so that you can start to think about some ways around electric vehicle charging, engagement with the Utilities Commission, and public energy benchmarking that might be of interest to you as we work to move forward our goals. Two other items, topic areas that could be of interest include the ADA program. As you know, Charlotte has a robust ADA program. I have folks on the line, Victoria Johnson, as well as Terry Bradley, who can talk more about that if that's of interest. And then finally, the other E in engagement, if you can just go to the next slide, Tom, which is community engagement. And as you know, we do it across every single department in lots of different ways. This is only just a snapshot of how we engage. Sometimes we're informing people of services that we're providing or things that they need to know. And sometimes we are deeply engaging and co-creating public spaces through the placemaking program, for example. There is a community of practice that is led by several leaders in the city. And we are very happy to have Tracy Etheridge on the call. She's one of the leaders who leads that, to really think through how we do that engagement in a way that is robust, that it can be similar across departments, and that it includes the right lenses, including an equity lens when we are engaging the community. And that could be a place where this council may be interested in this committee in helping to guide some of that framework. If you go to the next slide, this is where I'll stop. So based on what I just outlined, here's some potential policy items, some items that you may be interested in getting updates on. This, again, is just a template and can be reworked after we have this conversation. And in fact, it doesn't include even everything that I know you may have discussed today or prior to today's conversation. So I think what I'll do now is just turn it back over to the chair to lead that conversation. And we're here to listen, to answer questions, and to make sure that we can mold this template into a work plan that can be most beneficial to advancing all of the goals of this committee.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Do we have any other speakers, or is that it? And that's a lot of information.
I know.
The committee is ready to tackle equity piece. I know Councilmember Winston and I had this conversation where how do we bring equity focus and equity policy in everything that we do: housing, infrastructure, economic development, the environment. So I appreciate that Frederico had touched on that, and I'm looking forward to taking a deeper dive on this in terms of the creating and crafting citywide equity policy. And I see that extensive work has been done to meet our city's goals for CEAP. And however, we do need community's support to meet our larger 2050 goals, because we cannot do this alone. So I'm looking forward to hearing, Sarah, your action plan and next steps, and how do we bring private sector, the community, neighborhoods together to help us meet our 2050 goals. And also in terms of the engagement, as we were going through our UDO process, I know many council members had feedback on how do we go about engagement, and there needs to be some sort of consistency across all departments. I know Councilmember Johnson had provided feedback as we were going through our 2040 plan. How do we reach minority communities? How do we reach our elders? Especially in this world where we are living, it's very digital. So I'm looking forward to taking a deeper dive where we have consistency in engagement across all departments. But now I want to hear from my colleagues if they have any questions, concerns, feedback, suggestions on these items. Councilmember Winston.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. I would also, like to thank the mayor, for creating this committee. I think, while we have had an environment committee in the past, I think marrying that with equity and the engagement piece, and really, acknowledging that we have to do some work in those areas can really set the city council, or the people as a whole, for better governance over time as we do this work. with that said, I do have some, I guess, notes in each of the areas of what I would like staff, to work with staff on. When it comes to equity, I really think of two questions. How do we, as City Council, how do we apply an equity lens to the various decision-making processes that we have, right? And secondary, the second question to that is who is potentially negatively, most likely unintentionally, but who perchance in this change of paradigm, who is impacted by that decision, these decisions, and how can we mitigate the negative impacts on parts of populations or parts of town. I will say this kind of flows into the second engagement or policy piece, right? So staff, as has been outlined, like so many corporate entities in our community and throughout the country over the past few years, has really been focused on this internal kind of equity work, which is a great thing. But again, we, from a corporate board perspective, an external perspective, the decisions that City Council has to make, we don't have that equity policy. So the question is, how do we get there, right? Because City Council has so many different types of decisions that we have to make, from zoning to budget to economic development on incentives and CIP dollars and this, that, and the other. There is no one blanket kind of equity lens, I don't think, that would necessarily be germane to every single decision. So from an engagement perspective, how do we build this equity lens through kind of engaging intra-council communications, right? Whether that be individual council member priorities or workflows, the work that's happening in different committees, but really focusing in on these work streams, right? How do we engage with each other, again, City Council perspective, in all of the work that we are doing, so it works more seamlessly and comprehensively. So I gave that example from equity. I think that also is germane to the environment work, right? I know we're talking a lot about, for instance, stormwater and the tree canopy right off the bat. Well, that's not just simply going to be a quote unquote environmental issue, right? This is going to be an issue that is relevant to racial justice. This is going to be relevant to economic development, planning, and neighborhood building as it relates to the equitable growth framework and implementation of the Comp 2040 plan in the UDO. It's only going to work. We're only going to get really effective policies in those respective areas if this City Council and future City Councils are able to integrate that work and engage each other in a smooth fashion. So those are the kind of the ways that I'm thinking about this work. Please, staff, if there's any kind of clarifying questions, or if that was, I know that was a mouthful, please help me clarify wherever that is needed.
Federico, I wonder if there's some work that some other city councils have done, or some things that we could draw upon, either that you know about now or that we could prepare for future conversations and work plans. So if you have a moment to speak to that.
Sure, I'd love to come back with some information related to the City of Richmond's plan. Their work is coming out of their mayor's office, and so it has a bit of the same lens that Councilmember Winston just shared in relation to governance strategies from a council perspective. So I think that would be worthwhile. Also, our neighbor to the north, Raleigh, has done some unique work in how they've created their equity continuance. So I can bring that back to this committee at the next meeting. But I selfishly am very much excited on this particular focus. Equity does go across all departments and obviously ties back to engagement. So knowing that this is a focus of this committee is definitely beneficial to the overall work that we as a community need. So thankful for that, and believe that the work that is occurring in Richmond and in Raleigh would be good points of reference for this continued discussion.
I see Ms. Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not really a question, just a comment. I'm very excited to be a part of this committee. As Mr. Rios says, equity, goes across every policy, or at least it should. And we know that equity is not equality. So one of the things that we all know in this city that, we're at the bottom when it comes to upward mobility. So the focus on equity and engagement is so important. And I'm looking forward to perhaps setting benchmarks for each policy, or asking the questions, how does this apply, or how does this reach those who are feeling left behind, or those who are being left behind by certain policies. So I'm looking forward to implementing policies and checklists or benchmarks or whatever that looks like to apply to all policies. You mentioned a great example with the UDO. We know we have a digital divide. So, we say that in one meeting, and yet where are the tools in ensuring that we're reaching those who may not have access to the internet? So, I really just think that this group, or this focus, really aligns some of our priorities. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
A great feedback from our committee members. So, Sarah, would you like to go over some of the agenda items that we have that have pressing timeline because of the UDO? And then we can sort of create a list. I think you already have a running list of all the items that are coming in front of us. And committee members touched on those: equity policy, engagement, and we can continue to add items to that list. But I just want us to sort of go over the items that need our immediate attention because of this tight time frame that we have.
Sure, and maybe Tommy, you could just pull back up that one slide for a second, and we can kind of recap some of what we heard today, and then I can speak to Councilmember Ajmiri, your question. So Tom, if you can go to that framework slide, I think it's at the very end. Thank you. So one of the things that Councilmember Ajmiri and I discussed is work around the UDO. And so in particular, I think Councilmember Winston, you also mentioned a couple of those topic areas, which was stormwater and tree canopy. I'll also add that there is an electric vehicle charging ordinance in the UDO as well, which I think full council had discussed at some point. And so as the timeline for the UDO goes forward, I think the members on this council or on this committee are keenly interested in looking at those items. Councilmember Ajmiri, I think the question is putting these on the work plan as primary or secondary, and working with the TAP committee to align their view of when they're going to be looking at those items too. So I think those can go on the list in the lead up to the meeting in February, where you will be discussing this with your colleagues. Were there other items, Councilmember Ajmiri, that you wanted to highlight?
No, I think you captured the items that have been referred to our committee by the mayor and mayor pro tem to review and provide feedback on our tree ordinance and our stormwater ordinance. Those are the items that's been referred, but other items we can So I think so far, looks like you've captured everything. But if there are items that we need to add based on today's discussion, we can continue to add those.
Okay, great. And so just to highlight the equity and governance strategy under diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think we were taking notes and listening when Councilmember Johnson and Councilmember Winston were discussing sort of their view of what that might look like. So I think that's captured there, but I just want to gut check that makes sense to you all before we move on.
Yeah, I think Mr. Winston has his hand raised.
Yeah, obviously, I think the workflow of this committee will evolve short, medium, and long term. I think it's going to be important for us to be able to communicate with our colleagues certain things about the work in this committee. I think the most important thing is, how can they interact with this, either as from an individual council perspective, or again, from a policy area perspective or committee perspective, right? We are very comfortable, I think, generally speaking, in wrestling with environmental policy issues, right? We for instance, a prime example, the CEAP. This is something that City Council has wrestled and dealt with for a long time. But the equity engagement part, I think that is something that we are forming. And while we all have ideas, I don't think we literally have never come to a consensus about this. So we as staff and committee members need to think about the action review meeting in February. How do we kind of describe our work, and how do we guide our colleagues on effective ways to interact with the purview of this group, again, specifically around the equity engagement part, being that, again, that we're quite familiar with environmental policy at this point in time, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think Mr. Winston nailed it. So a lot of this work is new, and that's where I think we'll probably need a lot of our colleagues' feedback on, especially on the equity and engagement piece. So, yep, you're right on. Ms. Hazel, do we have anything else? Sarah, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry, I was having a technical glitch. I was saying that I believe that what I'm hearing from this committee also is that equity and governance strategy, and that fleshing that out further is a top priority for this committee. So if we're going to start to move things around in priority order, there's some priorities around time frame where there's some issues that are time sensitive, but also there's just like the big issues that you all are interested in tackling, and that should really be moved up to the top of the list, given the desire of what I'm hearing from you. So if that's accurate, or if that's inaccurate, please let me know.
That is accurate. It is something that we are all three of us are passionate about, and I'm sure many of our colleagues as well. So we do need to add that to our priority list. Ms. Johnson, have your hands raised?
I do, thank you. There's one area that I'd like to take a deeper dive, and that's the ADA. And I wanted to ask, I'm looking at this meeting on Facebook, and I noticed that there's closed captioning. And I don't know that I've noticed that before on other committee meetings or council member meetings. So that's exciting. That's intentional. And so I think we should look at ADA policies in all of our areas, not just transportation, but how are we as a city looking at ADA policies for employment, and just really make sure that we are considering that. I know that with our CATS, our STS, we know there's area or room for improvement in that area. So again, I'm looking forward to taking deep dives on our policies from a diversity and equity and ADA perspective. But again, just the closed captioning on the meeting, that's more engagement and more accessibility for individuals. So just really focusing on these areas, again, is exciting. So thank you, staff. Thank you for this change. I don't know if I hadn't noticed it before, but it's important. So I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
So,
Mr. Johnson, I'll say we do closed captioning on all of our meetings, and that is definitely really an important thing. I'll also invite Victoria Johnson or Terry Bradley if they have any additional comments on ADA that they want to make, but we can make a note that is an item of interest for an update on the plan.
Well, let me ask you, I know in county commission office meetings, they have someone who is doing sign language on the screen in their meetings. Do we have that as well?
So Terry, I don't know if you want to take it, but I can talk a little bit about what the law says, or do you want to answer that?
Well, go ahead, Nana. You can take it.
So when there's an emergency, and Terry, if I say this incorrectly, please correct me, but if there's an emergency or an item that has to be communicated, that is when sign language is used. However, for meetings like this, we do have the closed captioning, but it's not necessarily a law requirement for us to have a sign language interpreter for every meeting, unless it is in an emergency. Is that correct, Terry?
Somewhat. If we're doing a public meeting, we have to be intentional to make sure that the information is shared. I think what we came up with as an agreement with the Advocacy Council was that if there was an emergency meeting, we would always have a sign language interpreter. And they were okay with that. It is something in terms of just information just being shared to the public. I think we have to have a consideration to try to have a sign language interpreter at each time, but it's not something that we have to do because we do have other ways of making sure that the public gets the information, like you just said, with closed captioning and those types of things. But for the most part, a sign language interpreter always is needed when you have a public meeting, because again, with the deaf and hard of hearing community, you can't specifically rely on closed captioning because that's not the language they understand in most cases, because that's not what they were born with in some cases. So for us, we are okay because the Advocacy Council has agreed to allow us not to have them at every public meeting. But if we were having an emergency crisis, we agree with them that we would definitely have them at every emergency situation where we had a press conference.
Okay, I know this is the foundational meeting for the group. Perhaps we can talk offline, and I can get some more information on that.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I think this will be overall part of our equity policy. Looking at our policy, looking at our decisions from ADA perspective, looking at it. So this will be, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong here, but wouldn't this be part of our overall equity and governance strategy policy discussion?
I think that because so many different policies and practices and programs fall under what an equity and governance strategy, how it would apply, I think it would absolutely be, it would absolutely be a component of it. And what I I'm excited to hear this committee talk about is really looking at it from that broad perspective that can have overarching tentacles into all the work instead of kind of diving down into a silo, which I know is very easy to do sometimes because we want to make, great things happen. And sometimes it's easier to take one tiny piece, but it sounds like what you are interested in is looking at that broad perspective, and things like ABA would obviously fall underneath that.
Yeah, so maybe to Ms. Johnson's point, what we can do under equity and governance strategy line item, we can just add a bullet point where there is where we take deeper dive in ADA discussion and policies, so that we don't overlook that item.
Yeah, this is Victoria. I think that's a great idea because equity and governance strategy includes ADA as a part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think sometimes we think of those two things as separate when they're really one and the same throughout, and it needs to be woven in everyday life for citizens and our public that have challenges to meet, and we're not meeting them.
Ms. Johnson, thank you for saying that. I love that you said that. I was on a call recently. Many of you know that I started, that I was motivated to run trying to help someone who was on SSI find housing, and that's $771 a month. So when we talk about affordable housing, again, we have to look at, there's the 80% and those AMIs, but do we need specific policies for housing for the disabled? So, for affordable housing for the disabled. So thank you for saying that, Ms. Johnson. There is a true consideration for individuals who are disabled or differently abled in the community. And I think once we really start to focus on that community or that population, we'll be able to address a lot of the issues or challenges in our community.
I agree, Ms. Johnson. So Sarah, we can move on to our next topic.
Sounds great. And we have notes here, and we'll work together to reorganize based on this conversation for your strategy session to support you.
Right.
I guess we can go to the next slide, Councilmember Rajmir, for you. Yep.
So committee members, are we all okay with this? Any third Monday of each month, 10 to 11:30. You can get back to Sarah if this proposed time doesn't work. But I think Sarah and staff looked at all other committee meetings and looked at their calendars and other items that we have recurring. And this was the only time they could find that that allows them to prepare for setup and meeting. So if this time doesn't work, feel free to reach out to Sarah or Donata. But I'm good with this. I've checked with Amanda. I'm good with this time. Mr. Winston.
Yeah, I'm good with this time specifically. One thing I will say again, doesn't have to be figured out now. I think we should give ourselves an outlook in the midterm. I think we should get to a place again specifically around the equity engagement, but honestly about environment as well, where we go to other committees and kind of see if we can get on their agenda, just to give that kind of overview to again figure out how we get, because we need other committees to be thinking about this equity work, engagement work, and the environment. So somewhere I would hope in the next few months we would try to find as a committee time to go to those places and interact in that kind of place. Again, not something we have to figure out right now, but I want us to all be thinking about that.
Yes. So I know that each one of us serve on different committees, which is great because we can bring that equity lens to all the committees. I think if we look at it, like I serve on budget and economic development. I know Ms. Johnson serves on housing and public safety. And Mr. Winston, you serve on intergovernmental. And so I think we can all sort of wear equity lens hat and bring that perspective to all the committees. I don't think between three of us, I missed any committee, but I think also the strategy discussion, it's a great venue for us to discuss these items and bring this to our colleagues' attention that, hey, here are some of these items that we are looking at it from equity perspective that our committee is discussing. Have you thought of this or specific items? So I think a strategy discussion is also a great idea. But again, I'm not married to a specific format. We can certainly work through that as we discuss, as we take deeper dive into our overall citywide equity policy. So, all right, I guess that's all we have. Sarah, did I miss anything else? All right, well, great job and great first meeting.
Councilmember Edgemere, one other note that on that last conversation that you were just having, I believe that not only are the strategy sessions, forums, but I believe there's to be quarterly discussions with committees. So that might also be a place where you can bring some of these kind of critical cross-functional topics to full council. So I just wanted to make a note of that.
Yes. Thank you for highlighting that, Sarah. Yep, I was looking at the committee list and I noticed that between three of us, all the committees are covered. I mean, every single committee is covered. So Mayor did a great job of putting together a committee that covers all committees. So great thinking on her part. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And we'll see you later today for council meeting.